Greetings, colleagues. Do you attend meetings? I know, who doesn't? But what's the lexicon for a business English meeting? What words and terms do we often encounter in a meeting? If you're struggling to understand the procedures of the meeting, want to improve your business English vocabulary, or just want to get ready for that next round of meetings, then this is the video for you. We'll go through 44 common terms used in meetings and give some examples for each. Let's level up your business English. Greetings, colleagues. I'm Timothy Barrett, and welcome to the Business English Rundown. This is the show for professionals all over the world who want to improve their communication skills in English. All right, let's get started. First, AGM. What is AGM? This is Annual General Meeting. For a lot of countries, this is a standard requirement for a lot of corporations or companies. So depending on how the company is organized under the statutes of that country or state, but most companies are going to have a requirement that all of the owners of the company, the shareholders, have to get together and meet at least once a year. Now, of course, you don't have to attend, but the company has to have that meeting, and anyone who owns shares is invited to attend. This is the annual, meaning every year. General meeting meaning it's open to all the shareholders, all of the owners. Now, if you own stock in a large public company, you are, in theory, entitled to go to their annual general meeting. If it's a popular company, like Apple or Alphabet or Microsoft, then you're probably going to have to reserve your seat. They might not have enough seats for all of the shareholders. But for most companies, most of the shareholders aren't going to go to the meeting. And so, there's plenty of room. If you are a shareholder, you can attend. Now, the other important type of meeting is a board meeting. So it's not a general meeting, it's a board meeting for the board of directors. So this would be the board of directors of a company that will meet. And how often they meet depends on the company. They may meet, every month, every quarter, every week, or more or less as needed. When something comes up, they may have an emergency board meeting, that sort of thing.
So far this semester, he has been absent 9 times.
Absent or absentee. If someone is absent, they're an absentee, they are missing, they're not attending. So maybe there's a board meeting, but one of the board members is absent. They're an absentee on today's list. They didn't make it to today's meeting. Attendee, the opposite of absentee, attendee is a person who attended the meeting. And related to that, of course, is attendance. Did the person attend? Were they present for the meeting? I almost said physically present, meaning in the room, but in the 21st century, maybe that's not a requirement. But normally we think of someone attending as being physically present. Often we'll use this with school children, who is absent or who's attending. Was there a large attendance at the meeting last night, or was there a large attendance at the show last night? Meaning, did a lot of people attend? Did a lot of people go? Did they show up? Or if we're talking about an employee, we could talk about, he has very poor attendance. He's absent a lot, he's out sick a lot, or whatever reason, but he's absent a lot. So because of his poor attendance, he was fired. Agenda. Agenda are the points or tasks that want to be discussed at the meeting. If a meeting is well organized, you probably get the list of agenda items before the meeting, so you can kind of look through it. Maybe you can prepare questions or read up on reports or find out what you want to talk about, what's important to you regarding these agenda items. Or maybe you want to add an item to the agenda. You want to say, oh no, I think we should also talk about this project or this development. And you could ask to add it to the agenda. If it's a very formal meeting, then it may not be possible to add things to the agenda at the last minute. If it's more of an informal meeting, then it might be very easy to add items at the last minute. It depends on how the meeting is run.
Perhaps you would respond to an alternative form of persuasion.
Alternative or options. This is a choice of 2 or more things. Like we're hiring a new CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and we have two alternatives. We have candidate A and candidate B. We have two options.
Okay, let's go around the horn.
Around the horn. So it's kind of an older term. If you think of a boardroom or any type of conference room with one big table, this would mean that you go around the room and everyone gets to speak. Now, depending on why you're doing that, you could be talking about different things. Maybe it's just a weekly update. You're having a meeting with the team, and so the boss says, okay, let's go around the horn, and I want to hear updates from everybody. And usually you probably go in order, so that way no one is skipped. You can kind of know when you're going to speak. It could be a small thing. Maybe you have 30 seconds, or maybe it's longer. Maybe it's 5 or 10 minutes. But everyone speaks and gives an update or discusses what they want to discuss. Maybe you're talking about a major motion, a major decision, and so you want to go around the horn and get input from everybody. So everyone wants to speak about this major decision before you reach a decision or before there's a vote. So you go around the horn. Breakout groups. So if you have a very large meeting, or you're at a big conference, something like that, it's very common that sometimes it's good if you have 100 or more people, you're listening to the same speaker. It could be effective, but sometimes it's too large. So they might set up breakout groups or breakout rooms. And so that is a small group. Maybe it's 5 people, maybe it's 25, maybe it's 50. It could be 100 if you're at a conference of 1,000 attendees. Maybe there's a breakout group of 50 people that are going to go to this special room, and maybe they talk about different things. This would be common in conferences. If you're interested in topic A, go to this room. If you're interested in topic B, go to this room. And then, 2 hours from now, everyone meets back in the main room. Or it could be everyone's working on the same problem, but we can't work on it as 100 people, so we're going to break out into teams of 5 or 10 people. They're going to go separate. Maybe you're all in the same room. You're just kind of moving your chairs around. Or maybe you go to a different room and you discuss, you come up with ideas, plans, whatever the topic is. And then at the end of that, everyone comes back and then you give updates. Oh, this is what we think we should do.
Vice Chairman Nakatomi Investment Group.
Chair, or chairman, chairwoman, chairperson. So the chair is the person who runs the meeting. They're responsible for making sure everything is done correctly, everything stays on track, and that it should be done fairly, right? Now, traditionally, this was probably called chairman. Nowadays, of course, it's not uncommon for a woman to be the chair. We probably don't want to call her a chairman, so we could call her chairwoman. I think chairwoman is fine. Chairperson to me sounds a little unwieldy. I think chair is a great alternative. Then it's sex neutral, so it could be for a male or a female, the chair. Who is the chair of the meeting? Oh, we have a new chair this week. Last week, John was the chair. This week, Nancy is the chair.
I just like to clarify things.
Clarify. To make something a little clearer by maybe giving more information or answering questions about it. Kind of related word may be elaborate. So, you have a good idea, or that's an interesting idea. Could you elaborate on that? Could you explain it a little bit more? Or, I don't really understand what you're asking. Can you clarify your question? Discuss it a little bit more, make it clearer so that I can give an answer. A conference, a formal meeting for a discussion. This could be something quick, maybe informal. In your office, there's a conference room, so 3 or 5 people are going to meet and confer. They're going to discuss a topic. Maybe it's just update on what's happening in the week, or updates on a project, or dealing with a problem with the project. Or it could be something much more formal and in a larger scale. I'm going to a conference about international trade next week. In that case, it may be at a conference center. Maybe there's 1,000 people or more attending. It could be a much larger conference. But either way, we could say conference or the verb confer. And of course, we could have a conference call. This would be a call between 3 or more people. Traditionally, it was on the telephone. Now, maybe it's a virtual meeting more. But all those people talking at the same time, through electronic means, telephone, or maybe virtually through the computer. Consensus. So consensus is general agreement where everybody agrees. It may be hard to reach consensus if it's a difficult or controversial topic, but a lot of times we want to reach consensus. For example, if you're meeting with your friends, maybe one person wants to go to one restaurant, another wants to go to a different restaurant, another one wants just to go to a movie. But if you're friends, you're going to reach a consensus. Like, okay, I don't necessarily want to go to that restaurant, but everybody else does, so I'll go anyway. I'll kind of yield to the majority. I'll yield to everybody else because, okay, we can all enjoy that. If it's something that I vehemently oppose, I'm never going to go to that restaurant. That's a terrible restaurant. They treated me bad the last time I was there. Then I might not give in and say, okay, we're not going to go there, but what about this other restaurant? And we'll find consensus going to another restaurant. So same thing in a business meeting. Now, maybe if you're dealing with maybe a supplier and their client, they want to do things by consensus. If they have to change the contract, modify the provisions, maybe under the terms of the contract you can do that by yourself, but you do kind of want to have consensus. You do want the other party to realize, okay, this is fair. I'm not going to oppose it. I'm not going to fight you on it. And get them on board rather than just say this is what we're going to do if they don't like it. It's much better if we can get consensus. Of course, we can't do that all the time. In a meeting, we may discuss a proposal and we try to get consensus. Maybe it's a board meeting, so we're making an important decision. We want to get all of the board members on board, if possible. If we can rule by consensus, then it's probably a more effective way to run the company, the organization, whatever it is. But not always possible.
I've got a deadline on my series on the off-track betting in the Himalayas.
Deadline. If you're in high-pressure meetings, you'll often hear deadline. What is a deadline? It means that you have to complete this project by this date, this time. After that, it's late, it's not acceptable, there's going to be problems. This is the deadline. We have to complete this and submit it by Friday. Friday is the deadline. Or by the 1st of the month. That's the deadline. Or the deadline is the 20th of the month. Whatever it is. But that's the due date. And of course, some deadlines are hard and fast. You're going to be in big trouble if you don't deliver by the deadline. Others, may be more malleable. Maybe you can negotiate a little bit. Depends on what it is, of course.
Then what is the king's decision?
Decision. A decision is when the people in the meeting, it could be a board or a committee, or maybe it's the boss, but the boss makes a decision. We have maybe 2 alternatives or 5 alternatives, 5 options, but the committee or the boss says, okay, we're decided, we're going to go with option A. We're going to hire John, or we're going to fire John, whatever the decision is. I hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, conquer that like button and make it ours.
We interrupt this program for a special news bulletin.
Interrupt, or interruptions. So the verb is interrupt. If I interrupt, then I stop you from talking. In the middle of you talking, I start talking. I get you to stop. I'm interrupting you. Now, normally if we're running an orderly meeting, we don't want interruptions. Maybe we want to hear from everybody in the room, and so it's kind of rude to interrupt someone else as they are speaking. But when you have a conversation with someone, of course, that is part of the conversation. They start talking, maybe they say something that you didn't understand, or maybe you just didn't hear them. You will interrupt them and say, can you say that again? Or what was that? What was that, that you mentioned? Otherwise, they would continue and you have no idea what they're talking about. So depending on the context, sometimes interruptions are fine and normal, or it might be quite rude. In meetings, depends on the level of formality. Some meetings are very informal. If it's a board meeting or an annual general meeting with hundreds or thousands of people, of course it's going to be much more formal. It has to be, because if you're dealing with a meeting of 1,000 people, you can't have any person just interrupting the speaker whenever they don't hear something or want to ask a question. That would be kind of chaotic. So generally, the more people attending the meeting, the more formal it has to be. Otherwise, it just gets unwieldy. It gets difficult to kind of control.
Introductions all around. This is my XO, Lieutenant Stark.
Introductions. A lot of times at the beginning of the meeting, you might have people introduce themselves. You might go through introductions. If it's the first meeting of an organization, then that would be very normal. Or maybe you have new people attending the meeting, so you want to do introductions. And so if it's the same people meeting every week, then of course you're not going to do introductions. You might go around the horn and give an update or something like that, but you don't do introductions if everybody knows each other. But when there are new people, then it makes sense that you're going to start with introductions, so everybody can figure out who the other people are. So we'll do introductions. And again, usually that's at the beginning of the meeting.
All right, next item on the agenda. Santa, status report.
Item. So a lot of times we'll talk about agenda items, an item on the agenda, another item to discuss. So this is a point that has to be talked about. Maybe it's a decision, maybe it's an update, maybe it's just providing some additional information. But it's an item on the agenda.
Now, the main point here is we don't get Jimmy Chitwood back playing ball, we don't have a prayer.
Main point. A main point is the most essential point, the meat of your argument. So especially if you are giving a long speech, or you're talking for a few minutes or several minutes, when you get to the end, you might want to summarize what your main point was. So in conclusion, I think we should hire Nancy. She would be an excellent candidate for this position.
Wouldn't it be in the meeting minutes?
Minutes. If it's a formal meeting, then there may be minutes taken. That means that somebody records basically the notes of the meeting. And it doesn't have to be like word for word. It depends on who is taking the minutes. Usually it's the secretary. It could be, if it's a board meeting, it's probably the company secretary. If it's a committee, maybe the committee has a secretary. In normal business meetings, we probably don't take minutes. But if it's a formal meeting, if it's a government committee, government agency, maybe they're required by law to take minutes. A lot of times a board meeting is required by the bylaws or by the statutes that they would probably have to take minutes. Now, some may be more detailed than others, but it's at least a summary of what happened at the meeting. What was discussed? Was there a vote? What was decided? What directions did they give? That sort of thing. It's not the chair that's responsible for the minutes, because the chair is very busy during the meeting. The company secretary, for example, that will be responsible for the minutes. And it's good if you're doing that on a regular basis that they are consistent. Some can be more detailed or less detailed, but you want to be consistent from meeting to meeting and not vary widely.
Mr. President, I second the motion to postpone the vote on independence for a period of time sufficient for the writing of a declaration.
A motion. A motion is a formal proposal. So if we're having a formal meeting, then maybe one member will make a motion, or they will move. If we use it as a verb, we'll say move. The noun is a motion. So I move that we fire the CEO. Or a motion has been made that we terminate the CEO's contract.
I second the motion.
A lot of times if you have a motion, you need to have a second. A second person that agrees with that motion. So depending on how the meeting is run, but if you're following like Robert's Rules of Order, which is a popular way, a very common way to run a formal meeting, and it can be modified to suit the needs of the meeting, the committee or the company, whatever it is. But under those, when someone makes a formal motion, the chair will first ask, is there a second? And then someone else in the room might say, I second that. I agree with that motion, and I agree to second that motion. And if there's not a second, then depending on the rules, but maybe the motion is just ignored, because there hasn't been a second. If a second person is not interested in it, then it's not going to pass. We don't want to waste our time with it. But if it was seconded, then okay, we'll consider this motion, however that is under the rules.
Our objective is to win the war.
Objective. This is a common business English term. What is your objective? What is your main desire? What are you trying to achieve? What are you trying to reach? My main objective in this meeting is to find a new client, or my main objective is to meet potential clients. I don't expect that I'm going to make a sale today, but I do want to meet potential clients and then set up the sale in the future.
Though I doubt anyone can point out the actual provision to me.
Point out. Point out is to draw attention to something. I do want to point out on page 3 of the contract, it has this provision, and that's not going to be acceptable to us, or I don't feel comfortable with that. I do want to point out that, Nancy has a tremendous experience in this area. She has done this 5 times before.
Perhaps I will make you my proposal for Galahad's position.
Proposal. So this is a decision or course of action that was suggested, was proposed. Maybe similar to a motion, but it could be maybe less formal than a motion. Motion is generally much more formal. But a proposal is just an idea, suggestion that was proposed by someone.
The Court of Inquiry has come to a recommendation on this matter.
Recommend. So when someone advises a decision, a course of action, I recommend that we hire this person, or I recommend we don't hire this person. I recommend we stop using this vendor and we find somebody else to replace them.
So, to summarize, you have a minuscule revenue stream.
Summary, or summarize if we want to use it as a verb. A brief statement on the main points, or to make a brief statement.
This task was appointed to you, Frodo of the Shire.
The ring was entrusted to me. It's my task.
Task. We can use task as a verb or a noun. So a noun is basically a job or an activity, something that has to be done, has to be completed. Or we can use it as a verb when we say, I'm going to task John with following up with the client. That is, I'm giving a task to John. I'm assigning a task to John. John has been tasked with following up with the client, to contact the client and find out, whatever information we want. Or I have 5 tasks to do today, 5 things that I need to get done today. We'll often hear about task management programs, task management software. What's your task management system? There's lots of apps for that. Other people will just use pen and paper or an Excel file, but you have to keep track of all your tasks.
You want to talk to me? Let's talk face to face.
He wants to meet you face to face.
Face-to-face meeting. So a face-to-face meeting is generally an old-fashioned meeting. You're meeting face-to-face, in person. You're sitting down with them, talking to them. Now, as opposed to a video conference or a virtual meeting. Or sometimes I've heard it called an iConference, internet conference. So all of those would be, through the computer, through the internet. And it's not like a phone call where you're just hearing the audio, but you do get to see their face if they turned on their web camera. But ideally, everyone has their web camera on, and so you do get that benefit of seeing their face, seeing their facial features, and you can tell a lot. That you can tell a lot more when you're seeing someone's face and discussing something with them than if you're just hearing their voice. You can see, do they look happy? Do they look puzzled? Are they getting angry or irritated? Even if you are meeting virtually, you can learn a lot of those kind of facial clues or body language, which can be very important when communicating.
Now, if we can all agree to these, we can take a vote, and I think we can start off in the right direction.
Vote. So if it's a formal meeting, like a board meeting, an annual general meeting, something like that, there may be voting on certain measures, certain decisions. A vote is when everyone gets to say, yes, I agree or disagree. Usually voting is yes and no or something like that. You have 2 options, 2 alternatives, A and B, yes, no. We're going to agree or disagree, or we're going to do this or not going to do this. And it should be very clear. Sometimes in general elections, when there's a referendum, a common complaint is the question is not clear. So some people were confused. Wait, does a yes vote mean we support it? Or sometimes a yes vote means we don't support it. And so that can be very confusing if you're reading it for the first time when you're voting. So it's very important that it's very clear, what does a yes vote mean? What does a no vote mean? And then how do we vote? We could use a ballot, ballot voting that is a piece of paper. Now, it could be just as simple as writing yes or no, that sort of thing, or maybe it's pre-printed. It's got the question in a checkbox, check here for yes, here for no, that sort of thing, or, here for John, here for Nancy, whatever the decision is, but it's pre-printed. Other times it could just be writing in yes or no, John or Nancy, whatever the vote is for. Sometimes we use voice voting, especially if it's something not very controversial. You want to take a quick vote. Gee, should we take a break now or work for another 20 minutes and then take a break? You don't want to spend 5 minutes doing the vote. You might just say, all those who want to take a break now, vote aye, and people will say aye, and then those that oppose vote nay, nay, and then the chair should kind of figure out, well, clearly there's more ayes or clearly there's more nays, and so they will say the nays have it, we'll continue working, or the ayes have it, we'll take a break now. And so if there's a dispute, or maybe it's too close, sometimes it seemed like the same number of people, then you have to do a second vote. You have to kind of follow it up to make it clear. What might they do at that point? Show of hands.
By a show of hands only, how many of you have read the entire text?
So all those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, the chair will count. All those opposed, raise their hand. And then the chair will count, and then, okay, the ayes have it, the nays have it, and then we move on. Now, if it's something controversial, maybe you want a secret ballot, so you choose a written vote instead. Or sometimes it's a roll call vote, where instead of just everyone who wants yes voting at the same time or no voting at the same time, the chair or the secretary will read each name of the board, and each board member will say, yay or nay, yes or no, and then it's recorded. So if it's a very important vote, maybe that is the way that it should be done. Sometimes you'll see parliaments do this as well, but there's different ways to vote.
And because I will not fight, I will not cast a vote that will send others to fight in my stead.
Other voting terms, cast a vote or the casting of votes. So to cast a vote is when you vote, which is kind of a formal way to say it.
In an unanimous decision, we find there are no reasonable grounds for appeal.
Unanimous. Sometimes the decision has to be unanimous. Everyone agrees. Or maybe it doesn't have to be, but it is unanimous. Everyone agrees. No one disagrees. It could be unanimous that we all agree no, or it could be unanimous we all agree yes, but everyone agrees. Somewhat similar to consensus.
There's a proxy vote for a big reinvestment of the pension coming up. So if you just want to come by the old...
And also proxy or proxy vote. A proxy is basically a representative. I can't go, so I'm sending a proxy. I'm sending a representative. Maybe, I can't go to that wedding, I can't go to that funeral, but I'm sending, my son or my daughter to kind of represent the family. Or, I can't attend that meeting, so I'm going to send a proxy to attend for me. We talked about annual general meeting before. Maybe I own shares in a company. I can't attend the meeting, but I want someone to go for me. They'll be my proxy, my representative. And not only can they go for me, but they can also vote for me. So they can be my proxy vote. That is, I will assign my shares to them to vote my shares. If I have 100 shares, I have 100 votes, they get to control my 100 votes at this particular general meeting. That doesn't mean they can sell my shares, they don't have control over my shares, they just control the vote, my proxy, at this usually particular meeting, specific meeting. And sometimes in parliaments or Congress, they will do this as well. In the United States, there's a recent court case. It's kind of interesting to see how it will go, but a state is complaining that Congress was basically voting by proxy instead of having a quorum, being in person and voting, as the Constitution requires. Which brings us to our next word, quorum. A quorum is a designated number or percentage of members that are present, that are attending. Without a quorum, the committee or the board or a parliament cannot do anything officially. They might have an informal meeting, that sort of thing, that may be fine, but they can't make any decisions because there's not enough members. So usually a quorum is half, Sometimes it might be a little bit higher than that, but it's about half. And so imagine if you only have 2 out of 10 or 2 out of 100 or 200 members of parliament attending, but then they pass all these decisions. They make all these decisions, pass all these laws, but it was just 2 people doing that. That's not really fair. So they need to have a quorum. At least half of the members have to be present to make official decisions. Without a quorum, they can't make official decisions. It's time to conquer that like button and make it ours. If you enjoyed this video, then take the next step and watch this video on business English phrases for running a meeting. Continue your journey.